Hey, Kevin, how are you?
Hi, Katie. How are you?
I'm well. I was just saying that this is the first major confirmation hearing, and my friend Wendy is watching from Nashville, and it has been very contentious, as I said. Pete Hegseth, it's been very combative, and it's really divided along party lines. Can you talk about what you've seen and
Yeah.
basically what has unfolded today on Capitol Hill?
Oh, it's been fun. It's been spicy. It feels kind of like old times somewhat, but so just for context, like you said, I covered the Pentagon for many years. I was on the beat as a Pentagon reporter, um, really as a beat reporter starting in 2008. So this is maybe my like eighth or ninth SecDef potentially that I've covered. Um, I can't recall a hearing like this for any of them because there's never been a nominee like this. He's so beyond what you would expect from a qualified, government servant. People like Leon Panetta and Chuck Hagel, who were members of Congress or worked at the White House, or Bob Gates, a lifelong intelligence, security, White House, CIA leader. Uh, this guy looks like, what he is. He's a Fox Media personality, a Barstool former vet who's now been put in a seat of just unbelievable power and attention, and he's getting hammered today.
Well, I mean, he is getting hammered by Democrats, but he's not getting hammered by
Nope.
Republicans. And, in fairness to Pete Hegseth, I want to mention he is a decorated combat veteran who was deployed in Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, Iraq, and Afghanistan. He earned two Bronze Stars medals for his service in Iraq and Afghanistan. And in fact, Kevin, in his opening statement, he said he didn't have a similar biography to defense secretaries of the last 30 years, but argued it's time to give someone with dust on his boots the helm. I know you responded in a tweet, but why don't you just tell us your reaction to his claims that it's time to have someone with
Yeah.
dust on his boots at the helm?
I mean, he could turn around and look at the Pentagon right now at Secretary Lloyd Austin, former General Lloyd Austin, former Colonel Lloyd Austin, the Army, veteran who came out of West Point, who has literally led a war in the desert with plenty of dust on his boots. Or Jim Mattis, who like led troops into Fallujah with dust on his boots. Or Chuck Hagel, who has shrapnel from Vietnam still in his body because he was an infantryman with plenty of dust and mud on his boots. Even Mark Esper, who served in the Army and with combat credit. So look, it's a ridiculous statement, but it's part of the judge and the culture that there are MAGA land Trump supporters, especially in the military circles, who've long thought the kind of it's a little bit of a grunty masculine thing. Those generals don't know anything about us. The generals don't know us. We're down here, and so it's time marry that with the outsider, pretension of Trump land that we need outsiders of Washington because Washington doesn't know how to run itself. And so an outsider is always good, an insider is always bad. Fine in politics. For the Pentagon, as people have tried to make the case of, this is the world's largest organization, public organization.
3.4 million people, including 1.2
Yep.
active duty service members and 1.3 million reservists, as well as about 900,000 civilian
And a
employees. This
budget
is
of
a
almost
huge,
$900 billion.
right.
I mean, this is, we'll probably hit $1 trillion with the next president for the budget of the Pentagon. It's absurd. So credit to all of Pete Hegseth's military experience. The folks on the Hill are pointing out how it doesn't matter. It actually reminds me a little bit of during the Iraq War years when we started to see the first crop of veterans of those years who were running for Congress. And for at the time, there was a thinking like Congress doesn't understand the military. They don't understand war. We need more veterans in Congress. Shortly after, you started to see criticisms being written that, oh, it turns out that just having military service does not qualify you or necessarily turn you into a good politician, a good legislator, a good member of Congress. So yes, he may understand some level of the military, fine, but there are probably 100,000 or millions of others who do, as the Democrats are saying.
I wanted to ask you, I mean, there seems
Yeah.
to be various criticisms of Pete Hegseth. There have been some very damaging news stories, particularly Jane Mayers in the New Yorker, talking about, you know, he's got a lot of obviously flaws and character flaws, it appears, in terms of drinking, in terms of committing adultery, having children, getting women pregnant when he's married with children already. And I thought it was kind of rich that that one member of Congress was asking him to talk about his wife, because I wanted to say, which one is he
Hmm.
talking about? Because I guess he's on his third wife. And I'm not saying that that is disqualifying, but there seems to be a lot of questions about, I don't know, his personal behavior. Can you just address that? And if you think those are disqualifying, and then we'll get to the way he ran an organization he was in charge of.
Well, I think of these in two ways. One is kind of like what are the journalism rules for when this stuff becomes necessary or fair game for public, right? If it affects your public office. But then there's a separate set of rules, literally, for the military, the UCMJ, where, as you know, had adultery still causes you to lose your job if you're an officer, if you're a ship commander, a base commander, because it's considered that you put yourself in a compromising position where you might be blackmailed. It's a security concern. That doesn't apply to civilian appointees. And that one member of Congress very cheekily was like, find me a senator here who's had to quit their job because they cheated on their wife or didn't show up for a late night vote after having a couple drinks. Fine, cheeky point to make, but that's not the same as being the head of the chain of command for the entire U.S. military. It goes the military, SecDef, president. That's it. And so there's a different standard to be held to for that job, perhaps, than, I don't know, the Secretary of the Interior. Right or wrong, it exists. And so, the example matters. These kind of more staunch, more traditional morals and ethics kind of matter to the military community. At the same,
Kevin, I apologize because I forgot to mention the most serious allegation of sexual assault,
of course.
where charges were not filed, a settlement was reached. My understanding was the NDA was lifted from the victim and that she was free to tell her story. Whatever happened with that?
I honestly don't know the latest. I've seen the same, that the victims haven't come forward, but we just went through the Me Too era where we're not supposed to wait for ironclad video of an act happening before we believe accusers, but we're supposed to hear all this out. Again, we went through this with Kavanaugh. We went through in his hearings. This is the difference between your neighbor having allegations or a corporate CEO board allegations or an elected official in government, or a Secretary of Defense, an appointed cabinet member in charge of as Ash Carter would say, the world's finest fighting force. So, of course, this matters. And it matters in the U.S. military, where sexual assault has been a huge issue. And members of Congress like Kristen Gillibrand have been trying for years to change the code of military justice to make it harder to excuse leaders who are accused of sexual assault, give more protections for troops, give more avenues for coming forward. So yeah, this is an active issue that he would be thrust into if he were confirmed.
And he has raised eyebrows talking about the role of women in combat. On November 7th, he said on a podcast, quote, "I'm straight up just saying we should not have women in combat roles. It hasn't made us more effective, hasn't made us more lethal. It has made fighting more complicated." How do you reconcile this statement with his testimony today that women would be treated well under his watch? I know this was something that was a particular concern to Joni Ernst, who herself is a combat veteran who's also been a victim of sexual assault. So how do you
But
see all this?
who's indicated she's going to vote for him? I mean,
Yes, and
I would point folks to Senator Warren's questioning about it too, so where she said, 12 years of statements, and the last 30 days you suddenly changed your tune. They don't believe him, and I don't blame them for not believing him. But if for folks who don't know, this is a deep cut in the military, blogosphere that has persisted, where there are folks who think, Ted Cruz said this recently too in the last few years, that women shouldn't be in combat. It's part of the trad wife, extreme traditionalism views of women's role in anything, and that men should do the fighting and the women shouldn't. Well, the U.S. military got over that a long time ago. And the wars proved it out. There have been, women fighting in combat officially or unofficially for years. And so it was under, I think, Ash Carter who lifted the ban, or not lifted the ban, who changed the rules to open all combat jobs to women where necessary. And they did it in a very methodical way. They go out and, it's not, the White House doesn't just like write a statement and sign it and make it happen and then order it on the military. The military does studies, they talk to their commanders, they examine all the capabilities, and they put out this guidance saying where it doesn't affect it, this should happen. We now have, I don't even know how many numbers of women that have gone through Ranger School, Q School, Marine Officer Infantry Course. We've done this is so long that Tammy Baldwin has been a senator for I don't know how long, and she's doesn't have legs because of her combat service. So it's an odd throwback to an issue that most of us thought was settled long ago. It almost would be like saying black people should not be allowed to serve in the military because it's too disruptive. Blah, blah. Like, it's just so foreign to say it. It's from an extreme viewpoint. I think it's important to say that. This isn't a normal thing to say. This isn't like half the country thinks, yeah, this is a debatable thing that women should serve in the military. It's not. The only thing that we haven't got to as far as women in the military in this country is the draft. Right? That's still on the table, that women are not required to sign up for this selective service like men are, should they be. So I covered this 10 years ago when we would write about how so many other militaries around the world, especially ones like Israel where there's compulsory service, the women serve. Not all in combat, obviously, very few actually, but it's such an old throwback and unnecessary that, and to forget about actually making it happen. If you were going to change the rules and pull women, I wrote about it a while back, what are you going to do? Pull women out of their combat jobs? Pull women out of helicopter seats? And there are pilots, there are ship drivers, and yes, there are trigger pullers and door kickers and snipers who are women and have been for a while. It's just such a weird. It's just a weird thing. It's a weird position to have. It really is.
I wanted to ask you about his leadership of two veteran advocacy nonprofits, Vets for Freedom and Concerned Veterans for America. He did this before he joined Fox News as a contributor in 2014, eventually becoming co-host of the weekend Fox and Friends show. I guess the question is, he has faced a lot of criticism about how those organizations were run. And he was questioned about that by a number of members today. Can you tell us the things that have been pointed out about his leadership of those two organizations?
I only know a little bit about the veterans organizations, and that they're smaller organizations. They had financial difficulties. People have written headlines that he ran them both into the ground basically when he was there, and so that's been compared to running the Department of Defense with all the sizable numbers that you mentioned earlier. Millions of people, billions of dollars, an enormous agency of the federal government with federal government responsibilities. Again, compared to the previous position holders for Secretary of Defense, his experience just comes absolutely nowhere near it. I don't know what the equivalent might be. It's like saying if you ran I don't know, your community flag football organization, and now you're going to be in charge of the NFL. It's like that. It's just that different,
There's been talk about a pressure campaign that people have been describing. And I'm curious if let me read this. There have been reports the Trump transition team specifically waged a pressure campaign to get this nomination through. Senator Richard Blumenthal, he's a Democratic member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, said recently that he's, quote, deeply concerned by an apparent pattern of intimidation and threats, whether it's legal action or reputational harm. They're playing the hardest of hardball. It's harder by several orders of magnitude than almost any other confirmation. Elizabeth Warren, another Democrat on the committee, said the pressure tactics seem designed to ensure that witnesses don't speak up. What have you heard about this so-called pressure campaign and the impact it's having on his confirmation process?
I've seen some of those reports, and I'm honestly not sure what to make of them. But other than the fact that, again, this is so out of the ordinary from anything you would ever hear from previous confirmation hearings for, like, I don't know, Jim Mattis and Chuck Hagel. But it does sound very much like what we know about Trump land. You are either a Trump loyalist or you are out. That is known. We know that, for example, with anybody that was loyal or working with Mike Pompeo or with Nikki Haley, other former security officials. If you're from their world, you're not getting a Trump job. You are locked out. And this happened in the first Trump administration, right? If you signed that Never Trump letter, but then decided, okay, he's here, he's the guy. I'm a conservative Republican. I want to help them out with governance and join the administration. Nope, you are out. So it doesn't surprise me. I've also seen the reports that there are, senior military officers are now looking over their shoulder, wondering if their careers are done because they're somehow involved in DEI or any other reason. That this White House and whoever they put into the E-ring at the Pentagon are going to start, a Pentagon version of a purge campaign, just like we heard was going to happen across the federal government. This is what Stephen Miller and these folks want. They want loyalists in the government. Trump wants loyalists at the Pentagon, not just from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, like this General Milley, but all the way on down. And that's a hell of a story if that starts to happen.
And we have to point out that President-elect Trump had a very acrimonious parting of the ways, if you will, with people like General Mattis was more subtle, but Mark Milley and John Kelly, Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, John Kelly, former Marine, right? Former Marine, Kevin.
Yeah.
Wasn't
Yeah, he was. He's a Marine 3-star, then or 4-star. But
they were highly critical, both Milley and Kelly, highly critical of Donald Trump. So when it comes to military officials, it seems to me he does not want someone who is in a position to challenge him, having felt he was burned by these other military leaders in the previous administration and certainly during the previous election. So, is that why do you think he has gravitated to someone like Pete Hegseth, who doesn't have a great deal of experience and who may not be able to challenge some of Donald Trump's military decisions?
Yes, of course. It seems exactly that. I mean, now, to Donald Trump's credit and to Republican criticisms of the previous administration and General Milley's actions, a president is entitled to a military that follows the orders as long as they're lawful orders. And, senior officers have said, if you disagree with the president, you are obligated to walk with your feet out the door and resign. And some officers have done that in the past. I think we haven't talked a lot about, we've talked about the SecDef job, but the equivalent on the military uniform side is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And General C.Q. Brown, everybody expects, is out. He is not going to be, he's either going to be fired by the president outright, or come September, when he should be given his ceremonial second 2-year term. Actually, I think it's a full 4-year term. He wouldn't be renewed. Bottom line, he is out because he supported DEI policies. He supported them early and often. He came out with statements of support during the Black Lives Matter protests and George Floyd, and just goes against everything Hegseth and Trump wants. So yes, Trump should be entitled to generals who follow his orders, not work to subvert them, if they're legal orders. If you believe the roles of the military and political command to the letter of the law, and yes, people think nominating someone like Hegseth clearly is putting a weak, individual at the Pentagon who is just a Trump loyalist through and through. He's a sick fan. He's not going to do anything to challenge the president. He's going to carry out anything he wants, and so will anybody underneath him. People got to remember what you're in charge of, though, is not just things like political stories like DEI. He's in charge of the whole future of the United States military's arsenal. So billion-dollar contracts about cloud computing and technology, billion-dollar contracts about the future of the size of the Navy and shipyards and maintenance contracts. Also the size of the military itself, the makeup of the military, alliances. There's so many complex things at stake that Hegseth would be required that don't have anything to do with, is he going to follow the boss's whims of the day?
I think you're talking about policy and infrastructure issues, sure, Kevin, but there are also massive decisions about military involvement that have to be made immediately, right? Without hesitation. And so, the question is, who will he surround himself with, or will he have the experience to give the president of the United States the proper guidance about entering,
Yeah.
a military conflict. So you're right, there are huge policy issues, but there are also oftentimes emergency, immediate decisions that have to be made with the help of the Secretary of Defense.
Yeah, and you saw Senator Wicker, the new chairman of the SASC, said today in his opening statement, he kind of it was almost hilarious. He tried to say, Hegseth is the right guy for the job because he's an outsider, and we know he doesn't have experience, but that's okay because he's going to be surrounded by experienced people. And also, the SecDef doesn't really have that much authority to make change. Like, he kind of, which is ridiculous. Of course he does, and of course he should. And you're right, the 3 a.m. call in the morning type of question. If North Korea launches another missile test over Japan, in the past, the military does things to respond. They have to
Right.
turn ships around. They change orders. It does go to the president in the middle of the night, and the president asks his advisors, what do I do about it? He'll ask the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He'll ask the National Security Council, people like Mike Waltz coming in, who will be the ones who feed that advice up and in real time. But what happens if that missile doesn't make it across Japan and it crashes in Japan? One of the nightmare scenarios that we've thought about for a long time. What happens if another missile from Russia to Ukraine goes off course, and instead of landing in Poland, I don't know, lands in Germany, lands farther off, and there's an instant, huge response required that might have geopolitical consequences, I don't know, for generations? Is Pete Hegseth going to advise the president on that? Because this is not a military president. This is not a national security president. We know that. He doesn't have that inherent knowledge like others might. His chief of staff was John Kelly. Who's going to be in his inner circle to give him that kind of advice? And this is where it sounds great to say we want outsiders to come in Washington and shake things up, but experience matters in moments like that. And Hegseth's experience in the military is nowhere near the tank in the Situation Room, the Pentagon decision rooms where 4-star generals, chiefs with 40 years experience under their belt, and alliances and networks and friendships around the world are going to make consequential decisions about, I don't know, nuclear weapons.
It's pretty scary when you think about it,
Yeah,
and put it in.
I'm kind of setting alarms about this. I think, any type of normalization that, Hegseth, he doesn't like women in combat. I'm going to be a little louder about this. Like, these are not normal positions. These are extreme positions.
But also
And they're going to have
not the
extreme consequences.
normal background for a Secretary of Defense in any way, shape, or form. I guess the question is, Senate Majority Leader John Thune told Donald Trump privately that he believes Pete Hegseth has the votes to be confirmed. Is that what you're seeing from this hearing today, and what your reporting is telling you?
I don't know. He only needs a couple to hold him back. I think we'll find out soon enough, because too many members were holding their fire saying, well, he's entitled to a hearing and we'll have a hearing. But early signs look like, people like Joni Ernst. Honestly, I don't know, and I'll say this. Like, Joni Ernst is a good example, and so is Roger Wicker, so is Rubio, and there are others, where this is what happened when you're a defense reporter or a security reporter for a long time. A new name comes into the committee, and they come in billed as someone with security background, someone who's got their military, intelligence, whatever it might be. So the thinking is, they'll be serious about national security. They'll be serious about military issues. They won't be a partisan who's a bomb thrower. And then, these are the people that, are the adults in the room and are on the most bipartisan committee, the Senate Armed Services.
You're talking about people like Joni Ernst.
Yes. And then it turns out over the years, little by little, nope, these are partisans. They're politicians. They ran for office. They have ambitions. They have political needs. They have to make alliances. And so, Marco Rubio, for years, he's been a guy who, sometimes he'll say things and the entire national security bubble is very glad to hear what he says. And other times, oh man, he's just a Trumper through and through, right? And that's what these people are. And Joni Ernst is a great example of that. Yes, she's a woman who served in combat and is a victim of sexual assault, and she's still going to say, well, Trump's guy is fine by me. And so this is where we are. You have a movement that has taken over the country. You have a party in the Republicans who are falling in line. They have been for years. The outliers are very rare. Got people like Kinzinger and Cheney, and they're not in Congress anymore. So nobody knows. Everyone's hoping, everyone who disagrees with MAGAism is hoping that there will be 1, 3, 5 Republicans who will stand up and be the block for these nominees. But I don't know who they're going to be yet. I don't know.
And if in fact they will stand up.
Yeah.
Kevin Barron.
So
Kevin, it's great to see you. Thank you for your perspective. I just wanted to help people understand kind of what was going on with this nomination, and people should, maybe we'll put together highlights from the hearing so people can understand sort of the tenor of the conversations and the questions and answers. It's been fascinating to watch.
yeah, have fun with that. There are a lot of highlights from this hearing.
All right, Kevin, great to see you.
Too.
Thanks, everyone.